What happens when a man who transformed himself from a violent teenage criminal into one of Hollywood's most successful actors and producers sits down for what should be a friendly morning show interview, only to have his darkest past weaponized against him by a host who seems more interested in prosecution than conversation? What you're about to witness is one of the most uncomfortable confrontations ever captured on morning television. The moment when Mark Wahlberg, the Oscar-nominated actor who built an empire from the ashes of troubled youth, was forced to defend not just his career, but his very right to redemption. The studio went dead silent. The coffee cup stopped clinking, and George Stephanopoulos discovered that some transformations are real and questioning them has consequences. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments, because trust me, you're going to want to talk about this one. The morning had started with the usual bustling energy at the Good Morning America studios in Times Square. Mark Wahlberg was coming on the show to promote his latest film, and the production team was looking forward to it. Wahlberg was known for being a great interview, energetic, and engaging with a story of personal transformation that had inspired millions. At 53 years old, he remained one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. A man who had successfully transitioned from teen rapper to underwear model to serious dramatic actor to successful producer and entrepreneur. Mark arrived at the studio at an hour that would shock most people, but was completely normal for him. He had already completed his legendary 2:30 a.m. workout, attended morning mass, and had breakfast with his kids before most of America had hit their alarm clocks. This was the discipline that had defined his adult life, the structure he had built to replace the chaos of his youth. He greeted the production staff warmly, posing for photos with crew members who remembered watching him in Boogie Nights in The Departed Eye. Robin Roberts met him in the green room with a warm handshake. They had known each other for years, and there was mutual respect between them. Michael Strawn stopped by to talk about their shared love of sports and fitness, comparing workout routines with the enthusiasm of two men who took physical discipline seriously. Everything seemed set for a pleasant professional interview. What nobody anticipated was that George Stephanopoulos had arrived at the studio that morning with a very different agenda. The studio lights were bright as Mark took his seat on the famous GMA couch, settling in between Robin and Michael with the easy confidence of someone who had done hundreds of interviews. George sat nearby in his anchor position, his expression carrying its usual serious intensity. The audience in Times Square was waving through the windows, excited to catch a glimpse of one of Hollywood's biggest stars. "We are so happy to have this man here this morning," Robin began with her trademark warmth. "He's one of the hardest working people in Hollywood, an Oscar-nominated actor, a successful producer, and by all accounts, one of the nicest guys in the business. Please welcome Mark Wahlberg." The applause was enthusiastic, and Mark acknowledged it with a genuine smile. "Thank you so much. It's always great to be here. I love this show. Love you guys. So, let's talk about this new movie." Robin continued, "It looks absolutely incredible. Tell us about your character." Mark launched into an engaging description of the film, discussing the physical preparation required for the role, the message he hoped audiences would take away, the privilege of working with his director and co-stars. He was articulate and passionate, giving Robin exactly the kind of interview that made for great morning television. Then George Stephanopoulos leaned forward, and something in the atmosphere shifted noticeably. "Mark, I want to ask you about something that I think is important context for your story." George began, his voice carrying the serious tone he typically reserved for political interviews. "You've talked a lot over the years about your transformation, your redemption story, but I think we need to be honest about what you're being redeemed from. When you were 16 years old, you attacked two Vietnamese men in separate incidents. One of them, Johnny Trin, was left permanently blind in one eye. You served 45 days in jail. These weren't youthful indiscretions. These were violent hate crimes. Do you think America has been too quick to forgive you?" The question landed like a bomb in the middle of the bright, cheerful morning show set. The audience, visible through the windows, seemed to freeze. Robin's expression shifted to one of visible discomfort. Michael looked like he wanted to intervene, but couldn't find an opening. Mark's smile faded, replaced by something more guarded, more serious. "George, I've never hidden from my past," Mark replied, his voice measured, but carrying an undertone of tension. I've talked about it extensively. I've taken responsibility for it. I served my time. And I've spent the last 35 years trying to be a different person, trying to give back, trying to prove through my actions that people can change. George wasn't satisfied. But that's just it, Mark. You served 45 days for blinding a man. 45 days. And now you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You're beloved by America. You're sitting here promoting movies. Meanwhile, Johnny Trent has lived his entire adult life with one eye because of what you did. Does that seem like justice to you? The accusation was sharp and clearly designed to put Mark on the defensive. Several crew members exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the typical GMA interview, and everyone could feel the tension rising. I can't change what I did when I was 16 years old, Mark said, his voice growing quieter but more intense. I was a kid on drugs, running with the wrong people, full of anger I didn't understand. None of that excuses what I did. Nothing excuses it. But I have to believe that people can change, George. I have to believe that redemption is possible, because if it's not, then what's the point of anything? But here's what troubles me. George pressed, his journalist instincts clearly in full control now. In 2014, you applied for a pardon from the state of Massachusetts. You wanted your record expuned, and a lot of people, including some of your victims, saw that as incredibly tone-deaf, like you wanted to erase the past, instead of living with the consequences. Can you understand why that looked like you were trying to buy your way out of accountability? Mark's jaw tightened visibly. The pardon request was about being able to work with law enforcement on youth outreach programs. There were certain things I couldn't do with a felony record. It wasn't about erasing anything. I withdrew the application when I realized how it was being perceived. But I've never tried to hide from what I did. I've talked about it in every interview for 30 years. Have you ever personally apologized to Johnny Trent? George asked, his tone almost prosecutorial now. Have you ever looked him in the eye and said you were sorry for taking his site? The question seemed to hit Mark somewhere deep. He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that surprised everyone in the studio. I've reached out through intermediaries over the years. I've offered to meet, to apologize in person, to do whatever I could to make amends. The response has been complicated. Some of my victims have forgiven me, others haven't, and they have every right to feel however they feel. I can't force forgiveness. All I can do is try to live a life that shows I'm not that person anymore. Robin tried to steer the conversation somewhere safer. Mark, I think everyone can see how much you've changed. Your work with at-risk youth, your commitment to your family, and your faith. But George cut in before she could finish. Let's talk about that faith. Actually, you wake up at 2:30 in the morning. You go to church every day. You become this symbol of Catholic redemption. But some people might see that as performance, as image management. How do we know this isn't just another role you're playing? The accusation of inauthenticity seemed to strike something fundamental in Mark. His expression hardened in a way the audience had never seen from him in an interview setting. You want to know if my faith is real, George? You want to know if I actually believe what I say I believe? His voice was rising now, carrying an intensity that seemed to fill the entire studio. I wake up at 2:30 in the morning because I need that time with God before the chaos of the day begins. I go to Mass because it centers me, because it reminds me of who I'm supposed to be instead of who I used to be. That's not performance. That's survival. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on George's face. Do you have any idea what it's like to live with what I've done? To know that there are people walking around with scars, physical and emotional, because of choices I made when I was a kid. That weight doesn't go away, George. It doesn't matter how much money I make or how many movies I do. I carry it every single day. My faith isn't about erasing that guilt. It's about learning to live with it while still trying to do some good in the world. George seemed momentarily taken aback by the raw emotion, but he pressed on. But you have to understand how this looks to some people. A rich, famous movie star who committed hate crimes as a teenager, now living in a mansion, raising his kids in privilege, talking about redemption. There's a racial component to this that we haven't addressed. Your victims were Asian. Your crimes were racially motivated. In this era of heightened awareness about anti-Asian violence, Don't you think your story takes on a different meaning? The observation was pointed and clearly designed to corner Mark in the current social context. Mark sat very still for a long moment before responding. I am aware of that context every single day of my life. I've spoken to Asian American community groups. I've supported organizations that fight hate crimes. I've tried to use my platform to speak out against exactly the kind of violence I committed when I was young. But you're right, George. I can't escape what I did. I can't make it fit a neat narrative of redemption that makes everyone comfortable. All I can do is keep trying to be better and hope that my life, since then, counts for something. Michael Strawn finally found an opening to intervene. I think what a lot of us see when we look at Mark is someone who took the hardest possible road to transformation. Not everyone who grows up in those circumstances makes it out. Not everyone finds a way to change. But George wasn't interested in that perspective. With respect, Michael, that's the Hollywood version of the story. The reality is that Mark committed serious violent crimes and faced minimal consequences. He served 45 days in jail and went on to become a multi-millionaire celebrity. If he had been black, if he had committed those same crimes, does anyone really believe his story would have turned out the same way? The question introduced race in a way that made the entire studio tense. Mark's response was immediate and sharp. Don't do that, George. Don't use my past to make a point about racial inequality in the justice system. That's a real issue, an important issue, and it deserves better than being used as a weapon in a morning show ambush. Yes, the criminal justice system is unfair. Yes, I probably got chances that other people wouldn't have gotten. But using that to dismiss any possibility of redemption for anyone helps nobody. He stood up, and the movement seemed to startle everyone on set. I've spent 35 years trying to prove that people can change. I've worked with kids in Boston who are making the same mistakes I made, trying to show them there's another way. I've used my resources to support programs that help young people avoid the path I took. I've tried to raise my own children with values I didn't have when I was their age. And I've done it all while being completely honest about who I used to be. His voice was rising with a passion that seemed to shake the morning show format to its foundations. You want to sit there and question whether my transformation is real? Fine, question it. You want to bring up my worst moments every time I try to do something positive? Fine, that's your right. But don't you dare suggest that redemption is impossible, that people are defined forever by their worst actions, that theirs. No path back from the darkness. Because if that's true, then what hope is there for anyone? George tried to respond. Mark, I'm not saying redemption is impossible. I'm asking whether you've truly earned it, whether 45 days in jail and 35 years of success actually constitutes accountability for hate crimes. Accountability? Mark's laugh was bitter. You think I haven't been held accountable? Every interview I do, someone brings up what I did when I was 16. Every profile written about mentions it. My children have had to read about their father's crimes online. My wife married me knowing exactly who I used to be. I live with accountability every single day of my life. George, what I don't live with is people like you deciding that it's never enough, that no amount of change or growth or contribution can ever balance the scales. He turned to address the camera directly, and his voice shifted to something more measured, but deeply heartfelt. To anyone watching this who has made terrible mistakes, who has hurt people, who has done things they're ashamed of, I want you to know that change is possible. It's not easy. It takes years of work. It takes faith and discipline and a willingness to face your past honestly. But it's possible. Don't let anyone tell you that you're defined forever by your worst moment. Don't let anyone tell you that redemption is just a story Hollywood tells. He looked back at George. I came here today to talk about a movie I'm proud of, made with people I respect, telling a story I think matters. Instead, I've been put on trial for crimes I committed when I was a child, judged by someone who has never walked a mile in my shoes, questioned about the sincerity of my faith, by someone who apparently thinks spiritual transformation is just another form of image management. He straightened his jacket with deliberate calm. You know what the difference is between you and me, George? I know who I am. I know where I came from. I know what I've done, both the terrible things and the good things. I've spent 35 years building a life that I'm not ashamed of anymore. What have you built, George? What have you overcome? What demons have you faced and conquered? The questions hung in the air unanswered. I grew up in Dorchester with nothing. I was addicted to cocaine by the time I was 13. I was in and out of jail. I committed acts of violence that I'll regret until the day I die. And from the absolute bottom, I built a career, a family, a life of purpose. Not because I'm special, but because I refuse to accept that my past was my destiny. He turned to Robin and his voice softened. Robin, I'm sorry this went the way it did. You've always been good to me, and I appreciate that. He nodded to Michael. Michael, good to see you, brother. Keep grinding. Then he looked at George one final time. I hope you never have to experience the kind of fall I experienced, George. I hope you never have to claw your way back from the absolute bottom while the whole world watches and judges. But if you do, I hope you find more grace than you've shown me today. Because that's what redemption actually requires. Not just from the person seeking it, but from the people who have to decide whether to grant it. He started walking toward the exit. The movie opens next month. It's about a man who gets a second chance at life and has to decide what kind of person he's going to be. I think it's the best work I've ever done. I hope people will see it and judge it on its own merits. And I hope somewhere in that story, someone who's struggling, someone who thinks their past has disqualified them from a meaningful future will find a reason to keep fighting. He paused at the edge of the set. That's my legacy, George. Not what I did when I was 16. What I've done every day since then to try to be worthy of the second chance I was given. If that's not enough for you, that's your problem, not mine. And with that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the set of Good Morning America, leaving behind a stunned silence that seemed to swallow the entire studio. Robin looked close to tears. Michael was shaking his head slowly, and George Stephanopoulos sat in his anchor chair, looking like a man who was beginning to realize that he had perhaps crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. The show cut to commercial, but everyone knew that what had just happened couldn't be smoothed over with an advertisement break. A man who had spent 35 years proving that change was possible had been forced to defend that change against someone who seemed to believe that the past should be a permanent prison. And in defending himself, he had given a masterclass in what real accountability actually looks like. The aftermath of that interview would dominate entertainment and news media for weeks. Clips of Mark's powerful defense of redemption would be shared millions of times. Think pieces would be written about criminal justice, about second chances, about whether society truly believes in rehabilitation or just pays lip service to it. Some would praise George for asking the tough questions. Many more would note that there was a difference between journalism and cruelty, between accountability and persecution. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the conversation it sparked about redemption itself. Mark Wahlberg had done terrible things as a young man that was undeniable, and he had never tried to deny it. But he'd also spent decades trying to be different, trying to give back, trying to prove that the human capacity for change was real and meaningful. And when forced to defend that transformation on live television, he had shown exactly the kind of character that his critics claimed didn't exist. He had been honest about his failures. He had been accountable for his actions. He had been vulnerable about his struggles. And he had refused to accept that his worst moments were the only moments that defined who he was. For those watching who had ever made mistakes they were ashamed of, who had ever wondered if they could truly change, Mark Wahlberg's response was a powerful reminder that redemption isn't something that's granted once and then preserved forever. It's something you have to earn every single day through your choices and your actions. And sometimes you have to defend it against people who refuse to believe it's possible. What do you think about this incredible confrontation? Was George Stephanopoulos right to press Mark on his past, or did he go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comment below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that will absolutely leave you speechless.